The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Marcus Rodriguez pressed down on the chest of what everyone else had already declared a lost cause. 43 minutes. The other paramedics had stopped counting after 30, but Marcus kept going, sweat dripping onto the linoleum floor of the hospital corridor where they'd been forced to continue working after the emergency room filled beyond capacity. "Marcus, man, she's gone," his partner Jake whispered, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "The monitor's been flat for over 40 minutes, even if we got her back now." But Marcus couldn't stop. Something in the way the woman's hand had fallen reminded him of his 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, the same delicate fingers, the same silver ring on her pinky. The woman couldn't have been more than 25, somebody's daughter, maybe somebody's mother. The car accident had been brutal. Her sedan crushed between two trucks on the interstate during rush hour traffic. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and if you believe in never giving up. Dr. Patricia Williams approached with tired eyes. She'd been on shift for 16 hours, and Marcus could see the weight of too many losses etched across her face. "Rodriguez, I'm calling it. Time of death, 7:42 p.m. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd made this call hundreds of times before. Marcus looked up, his dark eyes blazing with something between desperation and determination. 5 more minutes, document. Please, just 5 more minutes." Dr. Williams sighed, glancing at the chaos around them. 3 more ambulances had arrived in the past hour, victims from a multi-car pileup. The hospital was drowning in trauma cases, and every second mattered. "Marcus, you've done everything possible. More than anyone would have done. Let her go." But Marcus couldn't let go, not tonight. Not when Sophia was at home with his mother, probably wondering why Daddy was late again. Why he always came home looking like he'd carried the world's pain on his shoulders. 6 months ago, Marcus had been unable to save his wife Elena from the cancer that ate through her lungs like wildfire. He'd held her hand as the monitors went silent, felt the exact moment her spirit left her body. He'd failed then when it mattered most. Tonight felt different. Tonight felt like a second chance at something he couldn't name. The woman's name was Claire Martinez, according to the wallet they'd found scattered across the highway. Inside were pictures of a toddler with curly black hair and a smile that could light up rooms. Another orphan, Marcus thought. Another family destroyed by twisted metal and bad timing. What happens next will shock you, because Marcus was about to discover something that would change everything he believed about life, death, and the power of refusing to surrender. He adjusted his position, checking his form, making sure each compression hit the precise spot between her ribs. His training kicked in, muscle memory taking over where hope and desperation had been driving him. Push hard, push fast, allow complete chest recoil. 100 to 120 compressions per minute. He could hear his instructor's voice from paramedic school, a gruff ex-Marine named Patterson, who drilled these numbers into their heads until they could perform CPR in their sleep. If you believe that miracles happen to those who refuse to quit, hit subscribe now. The monitor remained flatlined, that horrible continuous tone that paramedics learned to hate above all other sounds. But Marcus had developed a theory over his 12 years in emergency medicine. Sometimes the machines were wrong. Sometimes the heart needed more time to remember how to beat. Sometimes stubbornness was the only medicine that worked. Jake had given up trying to convince him, and was instead managing the crowd of nurses and doctors who kept stopping to stare. Word was spreading through the hospital about the paramedic who wouldn't stop CPR. Some whispered about PTSD, others about a man who'd simply lost his mind after losing too much. His wife died 6 months ago. Marcus heard someone whisper, "Cancer." He's been different since then, taking every case personally. They weren't wrong. Elena's death had cracked something open inside Marcus. Something raw and desperate that made him fight harder for strangers than most people fought for family. Sophia had noticed, too, the way her father held her a little longer at bedtime, checked on her breathing more frequently during the night. At 45 minutes, something shifted. Marcus felt it before the machines registered it, a subtle change in the resistance beneath his palms. Claire's chest felt different, less like pushing against dead weight, and more like pressing against something that wanted to respond. The monitor hiccuped. One single blip, barely visible, but Marcus saw it. "Did you see that?" he shouted to anyone listening. "The monitor, did you see it?" Dr. Williams rushed over, studying the screen with skeptical eyes. "I don't see anything, Marcus. The line's been flat for—" Another blip, this one stronger, more defined. Then another. The room fell silent except for the sound of Marcus, continuing compressions, and the slowly awakening heartbeat echoing through the speakers. Dr. Williams grabbed a stethoscope, listening to Claire's chest with the intensity of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "I've got a heartbeat," she announced, her voice barely above a whisper. "Weak, but it's there. Get me in 4 started, push another round of AP, and somebody call cardiology stat. Comment miracle, if you believe some things can't be explained by science alone." But Claire wasn't out of danger. Not even close. Having a heartbeat was just the first step in what would become the most challenging case of Marcus's career and the most important 3 days of his life. Her brain had been without oxygen for nearly 46 minutes, far beyond what medical textbooks considered survivable without severe neurological damage. As they wheeled Claire toward the ICU, Marcus finally allowed himself to stop the compressions that had kept her alive against all odds. His arms felt like rubber. His back screamed in protest, and his uniform was soaked through with sweat. But for the first time in months, he felt something that had been missing since Elena's diagnosis. Hope. Dr. Williams pulled him aside as the ICU team took over Claire's care. "Marcus, what you did, and there was—" She paused, searching for words that didn't exist in medical training. "I've never seen anything like it, but you need to understand reality. 46 minutes without circulation means the chances of meaningful recovery are essentially zero. Even if she wakes up, the person she was before is likely gone forever." Marcus nodded, but her words felt distant, like warnings shouted from the other side of the canyon. He'd felt Elena's spirit leave her body 6 months ago, that unmistakable moment when someone crosses from life to whatever comes after. With Claire, that moment had never come. Even during the longest, darkest minutes of CPR, something had remained, something that refused to surrender. Over the next 72 hours, Marcus found himself spending every off-duty moment in the ICU waiting room. Sophia stayed with his mother, who didn't ask questions but packed extra lunches and made sure Marcus's uniforms were clean. The Latino community had ways of supporting their own without making a fuss about it. Claire remained in a medically induced coma while her body recovered from the trauma. Her parents, Maria and Carlos Martinez, had flown in from Phoenix, bringing with them Claire's 2-year-old son, David. The little boy had his mother's dark eyes and a way of looking at the world like he was solving complex problems in his head. If you've ever waited for someone you love to wake up, share this with someone who needs to hear it. On the second day, Marcus was sitting in the waiting room when David toddled over and climbed into his lap without invitation. The little boy studied Marcus's face with a serious concentration that only toddlers possess, then reached up and touched the name tag on his uniform. "Marcus," David pronounced carefully, like he was testing how the name felt in his mouth. "That's right, buddy. I'm Marcus." David nodded solemnly. "You saved Mama." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. This little boy didn't understand medical terminology or survival statistics. He only knew that his mother had been broken, and now she was breathing again, and somehow the man whose name he just learned was responsible for that miracle. Carlos Martinez approached, his face etched with a particular exhaustion that comes from watching someone you love fight for their life. "Mr. Rodriguez, we can't thank you enough for what you did. The doctors told us you refused to give up when everyone else had stopped trying." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, still not used to being called a hero for simply doing his job the way his heart told him to do it. I couldn't stop. Something told me she wasn't ready to go. The doctors say the next 24 hours are critical," Maria Martinez added, settling into the chair beside them. "They're going to try reducing the sedation tomorrow to see if she responds." That night, Marcus went home to Sophia for the first time in 3 days. His daughter was waiting up despite his mother's protests, curled on the couch in her favorite purple pajamas with the unicorns Elena had bought her last Christmas. "Daddy, did you save someone?" she asked as he scooped her into a hug that lasted longer than usual. "I tried, Mija. Sometimes trying is all we can do. Sophia pulled back to look at his face, her expression far too serious for an 8-year-old. Mama used to say that angels help people who help other people. Maybe an angel helped you help the lady. Before Marcus could respond, Sophia had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her breathing deep and peaceful in a way that only children's sleep can be. He carried her to bed and tucked her in, whispering the same prayer Elena used to say, "Keep her safe, keep her happy, keep her dreaming." The third day arrived with the kind of crisp autumn morning that made everything feel possible. Marcus arrived at the hospital to find controlled chaos in the ICU. Dr. Williams was consulting with a neurologist, their voices urgent but cautious. "She's responding to verbal commands," Dr. Williams explained when she saw Marcus approaching. "Nothing complex yet, but she squeezed her mother's hand when asked and opened her eyes briefly. The EEG shows normal brain activity, which is—" She paused, shaking her head in amazement. "It's unprecedented. After 46 minutes without circulation, we should be seeing massive brain damage. Instead, her neurological function appears to be intact. Only people with hearts will subscribe now, because what happened next will restore your faith in the impossible." Marcus was standing outside Claire's room when she opened her eyes for the first time and looked directly at him. Not the unfocused gaze of someone emerging from a coma, but the clear, present look of someone who was fully aware of where she was and why. "You're the one," she whispered, her voice rough from the breathing tube that had been removed that morning. "You're the one who wouldn't let me go." Marcus stepped closer to her bed, unsure how to respond. "I'm Marcus Rodriguez. I'm a paramedic. I was part of the team that brought you in." Claire smiled, and Marcus could see why her son had inherited that radiant expression. "I remember everything. The accident, the ambulance, arriving at the hospital. But mostly, I remember your voice telling me to fight, telling me my little boy needed his mama to come home." Dr. Williams appeared at Marcus's shoulder, clipboard in hand and amazement written across her face. "Claire, can you tell me what day it is? Do you remember what happened to you?" For the next hour, Claire answered every question perfectly, demonstrated full motor function, and showed no signs of the brain damage that should have been inevitable. The medical team ran test after test, searching for explanations that didn't exist in textbooks. "It's medically impossible," Dr. Williams confided to Marcus later. 46 minutes without circulation should cause irreversible brain death, but her cognitive function is completely normal. Her memories are intact. It's like those 46 minutes never happened. What the doctors didn't know, what Marcus was only beginning to understand, was that Claire's recovery wasn't just medically impossible. It was about to change his life in ways he couldn't have imagined. 2 weeks later, Claire was discharged with a clean bill of health and strict instructions to take things slowly. The accident had been caused by a drunk driver who was now facing vehicular assault charges, but Claire harbored no anger. She was too grateful to be alive, too amazed to be holding her son again. Marcus had visited every day during her recovery, initially out of professional curiosity, and gradually because he'd formed an unexpected friendship with Claire and her family. Sophia had come along on several visits, and the 2-year-old David had appointed himself her honorary little brother. Share this with someone who believes in second chances. On the day of Claire's discharge, she asked Marcus to walk with her to the hospital's memorial garden, a quiet space where families often came to process grief and gratitude. The autumn leaves were brilliant gold and red, and the afternoon sun cast everything in warm light. "I need to tell you something," Claire said as they settled on a bench overlooking the garden. "During those 46 minutes, I wasn't unconscious. I was somewhere else, somewhere bright and peaceful. But I could hear your voice telling me to fight, telling me David needed me. Every time I started to drift away, your voice pulled me back." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Claire, you don't need to thank me. Any paramedic would have." "No," she interrupted gently. "They wouldn't have. Everyone else had given up. The doctors told me later that you continued CPR for 46 minutes when protocol says to stop after 20. You saved my life by refusing to follow the rules." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching David chase fallen leaves while Sophia helped him collect the prettiest ones. The children's laughter echoed through the garden, a sound that seemed to chase away the shadows that had been following Marcus for months. "I have something else to tell you," Claire continued. "During my time in that bright place, I wasn't alone. There was a woman there, someone with kind eyes and a voice like music. She told me it wasn't my time, that my little boy needed his mother, and that someone on earth was fighting for me. She said her name was Elena." Marcus's world stopped. Elena, his Elena, who had died 6 months ago after promising to watch over him, and Sophia from whatever came next. Elena, who had made him promise to keep helping people even when helping felt impossible. She said to tell you that Sophia's going to be fine, that you're exactly the father she needs, and that it's okay to start living again instead of just surviving. Comment, Elena, if you believe love transcends everything, even death. The tears came then, the first ones Marcus had allowed himself since Elena's funeral. They weren't tears of grief, but of recognition. Understanding that his wife had somehow reached across the impossible distance between life and death to guide his hands during those 46 minutes of CPR. Claire reached over and took his hand, her touch warm and real and present. She also said that sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. 6 months later, Marcus and Claire were married in the same memorial garden where she had delivered Elena's message. Sophia's serve is maid of honor, serious and proud in her purple dress, while David tottered down the aisle as ring bearer with the focused determination of someone performing the most important job in the world. The guest list included everyone from the hospital who had witnessed a miracle, Dr. Williams, who had become like family, and Jake, who had finally stopped teasing Marcus about his stubborn refusal to give up on lost causes. During his vows, Marcus looked into Claire's eyes and spoke about the night that had changed everything. "I thought I was saving you," he said, his voice steady and strong. "But really you saved me. You taught me that love doesn't end when life ends, that miracles happen when people refuse to surrender, and that sometimes the greatest act of faith is simply refusing to stop trying." Claire's vows spoke of second chances and guardian angels, of little boys who needed fathers and little girls who needed mothers, of families that form in most unexpected ways when tragedy transforms into triumph. As they exchanged rings, Marcus felt Elena's presence as clearly as he felt the autumn sun on his face, not as sadness or loss, but as blessing and approval, the final gift from someone who had loved him enough to guide him toward a future worth living. Hit subscribe if you believe that sometimes the most important moments happen when everything seems lost. The reception was held in the hospital cafeteria, transformed with white lights and flowers donated by local florists who had followed Claire's story in the news. Dr. Williams gave a toast about medical miracles and the power of never giving up, while Sophia and David chased each other between tables, their laughter the sweetest music anyone had ever heard. Late that night, as Marcus tucked Sophia into bed in their new home, she looked up at him with Elena's eyes and his own stubborn chin. "Daddy, did Mama Elena really help you save Claire?" Marcus considered lying, offering some simple explanation that would make sense to an 8-year-old. Instead, he chose truth. "I think she did, Mija. I think sometimes people who love us find ways to help us even after they can't be with us anymore." Sophia nodded sagely, already accepting mysteries that adults spent lifetimes trying to understand. "I think Mama Elena likes Claire, and she really likes David. He makes good sound when he laughs." From the next room came the sound of Claire reading David a bedtime story, her voice soft and musical, just as Elena's had been. Marcus kissed Sophia's forehead and whispered the prayer that had become their family tradition. "Keep her safe, keep her happy, keep her dreaming." As he turned off the light, Sophia called out one more time, "Daddy, tomorrow can we practice CPR? Just in case?" Marcus smiled, understanding that his daughter had inherited both his healing hands and Elena's enormous heart. "Tomorrow we practice CPR," he promised. Because sometimes the most important lessons we teach our children are about refusing to give up, about fighting for strangers like their family, and about believing in miracles even when everyone else has stopped believing, especially then.